Hey, it's Eric. I'm back with another VC video. Today I'm going to be talking about 80s soundtracks. Some that people might know and some people might not know. One of the great things about 80s soundtracks was usually a record company would get hired to provide the soundtrack for some movie, and they would bring in some of their artists, and sometimes it would be just do a cover of something, and sometimes it would be we're going to pay you X amount of dollars and you got 6 weeks to write and record this song. Oftentimes the artist would just toss it off. So either you got crap or you got something that was kind of a gem because it wasn't overthought, overproduced. It was a quick way to make some dollars while they were on tour, between tours, or getting ready for their next album, throwing a B-side, whatever. So sometimes, especially with rock and pop music, that you got these little gems that weren't over-edited, overthought. So anyways, so first off, we're going to talk about The Wildlife. This was kind of a Fast Times at Ridgemont High-esque film. On the soundtrack, you got Bananarama, you've got Charlie Sexton, you've got The 3 O'Clock, and you've got Edward Van Halen, which is probably why this movie has been out of circulation for so long. I think that there is a DVD-R release, a video on demand from, Paramount or somebody of this now. I don't know if it has the original soundtrack, but, this was kind of a typical 80s LA soundtrack. So, next we've got Permanent Record. So this is one of the early films that Keanu Reeves did. He's actually quite good in it. It's about a group of teens dealing with the aftermath of the suicide of their friend. And this has got Joe Strummer and the Latino Rockabilly War on it, along with the Godfathers, the Bodines, J.D. Southern, the Stranglers, and Lou Reed. So, this is some great cult music. Highly recommend the movie if you haven't checked it out. It was actually quite well done, and it's nice to see Keanu actually act in his early days, even though he's kind of, in some ways, kind of a Bill and Ted precursor character in this. Next up, speaking of LA teen films, and I haven't even opened this one, Out of Bounds, Anthony Michael Hall, in a on-the-run action film. This has got Stuart Copeland, Adam Ant, The Cult, Susie and the Banshees, Belinda Carlisle, Night Ranger, Lords of the New Church on it. So, kind of lesser-known second-tier goth new wave punk bands. Definitely, this is also a film that's out of print. I have the VHS up here somewhere. It's over there. Anyway, this is one of those gems that you're going to find for a couple bucks. Look, I paid $4 for it, and it's still sealed. So, it's a way to check out some of these bands and to hear some of the tracks that may or may not have wound up on actual album releases. Speaking of very, very 80s, we had the aerobics fad. So this is the Heavenly Body soundtrack. This has got Sparks, it's got the Tubes, it's got Gary Wright on it. So a lot of cool kind of, what you would expect 80s synth dancey stuff. So now we're getting to the ones that are more well known, and I got this, I believe, for $1 or $2. To Live and Die in LA, Wang Chung. This is an interesting record because it is basically Wang Chung doing the whole thing. However, if you watch the film, there are scenes when they're in a very blue-collar bar that features bands like the Blasters and Rank and File, which were definitely 1980s LA kind of roots rock stuff, where this soundtrack is all about the synth and fakeness, and that's exactly what the movie's about. Great movie, great soundtrack, highly recommended. All right. Oop, I don't want that to slide. Lesser known soundtrack for an interesting film. This is No Small Affair, starring Demi Moore and John Cryer. Demi Moore plays a singer. This has got Twisted Sister, and it's got Rupert Holmes, and then a bunch of kind of pseudo 80s torch song stuff. The artist's name is Fiona. I actually quite like this movie and quite like this record. It's sweet. It's got some great stuff on it. It's, nothing groundbreaking, but it's an interesting artifact of the era. And it's funny that I read John Cryer's biography last year or whenever it came out, and he mentions that, he was romantically involved with Demi Moore around the time they were making this film, and that when he was doing 2.5 Men with Ashton Kutcher, he said, I thought, she probably thinks that's a strange arc from me to him. So, moving along to other well-known soundtracks. The music of Giorgio Moroder with David Bowie, Cat People. Yeah, $3. Look at that. It's not a lot on this album, but it's David Bowie doing Cat People and Giorgio Moroder, and it's a kind of classic 80s horror slash fear of sexuality film. It's a remake of a 40s film. It's good stuff. Okay, so if I was to say 80s rock and roll B film, the best known, that had a big, huge hit song, hopefully you're going to think Eddie and the Cruisers. Total Springsteen-style bar band music. Classic B-film tale of rock and roll. I wish that we had more films that were coming out these days like this. There seems to be a drought of them. At least, if you know of any, let me know. In the 80s and 90s especially, we had a lot of really great, lesser-known rock and roll-based films. Speaking of Michael Paré, one of my very personal favorites. Kind of really love this album, Streets of Fire, a rock opera. Kind of higher tier failure of a film that has a major cult following. I believe it might be finally getting a Blu-ray release. Songs by Jim Steinman, who works with Meatloaf. Just some great stuff on here. Also, the big hit song was, where is it? I Can Dream About You by Dan Hartman. That was all over the radio. And I would also point out, I mentioned the Blasters. The Blasters are on here. The Blasters actually appear in the film along with William Dafoe and Lee Ving, who William Dafoe was also the bad guy in To Live and Die in L.A. Now, to me, the granddaddy of 1980s soundtracks. One of the two records that changed my life. I actually have the other one on vinyl. I couldn't put my hands on it. Both of them are soundtracks. This one is The Return of the Living Dead. Classic horror punk soundtrack. The only thing it's missing is the Misfits and the Meteors. Although the Meteors, which was a British punk band that mixed rockabilly and punk into psychobilly, are kind of represented via the Tall Boys, which was an offshoot of the Meteors. I also have the picture disc, which I'm not going to show, Olive, and this is just actually a cover. The Cramps, 45 Grave, TSOL, the Flesh Eaters, Roky Erickson, The Damned, the Tall Boys, Jet Blackberries, and SSQ. Near perfect horror punk soundtrack. We're coming up on July 4th, which is when this film takes place, so it's always worth a revisit. There is a new Blu-ray of the film coming out with a bunch of extras, including supposedly an expanded documentary on the soundtrack. I consider myself something of an expert on this soundtrack. There are actually 2 songs that were written for this film that were not used in the film. And they were released on one of the bands I mentioned. It was released on their debut album on a separate 12-inch disc. And I'm going to be showing that at some point, so I can talk about that then. But classic stuff. I believe this has been reissued recently, so it should be something that you can find out there. It's a great soundtrack, great part of the era. For a film that I actually really, really also like. Probably I own more copies of it than any other film. My copies are right. I've got the Steelbook, and I've got DVD, and somewhere over here I've got the VHS, and then I have also ordered the new Blu-ray set that's coming out. So, tell me what you think. Tell me what you like. Tell me about 80s soundtracks that have hidden gems on them. If you like the video, hit like. You can leave comments below. I do a podcast called Love That Album, where I oftentimes, each month, I will talk about either compilations or soundtracks, and then on the main show, I'll talk about a record that's related to whatever the topic of the main show is. You can find that, just Google Love That Album. You can find it on Facebook. Or you can just, like I said, Google it. It's Eric. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all later.